it's what I'm talking about is the top organizations that are involved in all of this, right? And they have all their investors, and then their investors are sorted out. You can track all of them, right? They're all in each other's business. None of them are separate. So at the top of the list are two, and one of them is Vanguard, and the other one was BlackRock. So, and they're stacked on top of each other, being BlackRock underneath and then Vanguard on top, kind of thing, from my understanding. And the investors of BlackRock go out into everything else, and it's always the top. I think there's like 5 that repeat over and over and over, and it's stuff like the Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation, yada, right? It's those kind of investors. And then Vanguard, there's not much information on, right? It's sealed. It's not published or documented, which I found really interesting. I was like, why can't we know who those people are? But those are the people you want to know who are, because that's who's at the top of this, right? And some would say that's the 13 families. Some would say that's the, right, the allegiance of the globalists, right, that we think is Soros and the Rockefellers, and like list all the names, right? All the people, the Gates, all the people who are at the top of that pile. And the studying that I've been doing, which is what we're about to get into, has kind of led me a different direction. There is a lot of information and speculation about the ET origins of humans, right? And whether you believe that or not, whether you're a Bible person or not, there's interesting information that will give you a different look at it if you take the time to look at it and try and see it differently, okay? So I don't even know exactly where to start with this, so I'm going to start in the easiest place I can and tell you about a man named Paul Wallace. So here's a book that I have been reading. I think I've read this book 15 times if I've read it once, and I got it maybe 3 weeks ago. And then here's his other book. Both of them are interesting and will make your eyes kind of split. And the reason I'm using this particular book to do this today is because he laid it out so nicely. But you find the information in a lot of different places, including as far back as the 1850s and even further. There's, you know, Catholic priests and different people throughout history who started questioning the same things because we were all reading the same Bible. And if you're not brainwashed reading it, you start to go, wait, what? What does that say? Like, how does this work in your mind? So I want to help you possibly open your mind to some of this a little bit. And if you're totally a Bible person, I apologize, because you are going to have to really resort what you think God is, and I'll give you my interpretation at this point, and how I let it input information, how I let the field input information into my system, so that I can stay open to see some of these things. So if we start in the book of Genesis, which is where everything starts, you'll start getting a really big clue if you're reading the right text. Now, here's where this can get crazy, and I have so many of these, it's not even funny, and I think I've showed them to you before. So here's one, right, the Concordant Literal. This is only the New Testament. I couldn't even get the Old Testament. They were sold out of it. I haven't tried again. I have a copy of the Tanakh. This is the book that they use, the Jews use, a stone edition Tanakh, and it does have both languages in it. You do have to read it backwards because it starts at what we would consider the back of the book and then reads forward. So then you get both languages, which is really interesting to have your hands on. I'm making a mess over here. I have a copy of a Bible that Sid Roth wrote from its Supernatural. I actually love this copy because it's more of a literal translation than any other translation I've ever seen. Although it uses God instead of the origin words. This is the one that tripped me the hardest. And I found this years ago in a used bookstore, and I bought it, and it's called the New Jerusalem Bible. And it uses the words Elohim and the words Yahweh in the places in the scriptures where they were written originally, which is trippy because in any other Bible, find a more new one.
Wait, that's called what? The new what Bible?
The New Jerusalem Bible.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know which edition I have, but it still uses all of the Elohim and the Yahweh words. And then I have something like this is an inspirational study Bible, Max Lucado. Everything in here says God. Every original name of God is translated into the word God. So that's the only way you know it, which is why it seems like God is bipolar sometimes and why some of the stories just flat out don't make sense. Because if you start to read it the way I'm about to give you an indication of, it will give you a whole different idea. Even the King James Bible, which I don't know where that one went, it was up there, uses the names interchangeably, right? So when they were chopping and pasting the Old Testament, even the New Testament, I'm guessing, I lost my place in my brain. When they were chopping it all up, the words themselves meant what group they were talking about. Let me read this to you. And I'm just going to read straight out of his book so you know what I'm doing here. Because once we get into where the verses are and you start to actually see this emerge for yourself, the only thing you can do is stop and go, wait, what? What did you just read? What did I just see? And if you read it from the New Jerusalem Bible, the words are in there. And it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make any sense at all when you read it the way it's written. So we're going to just start. Let me see where we're going to start. So this guy's name is Paul Wallace. And the reason he started looking at this is because he is a priest. He's done a lot of teaching. He's done a lot of writing. You can look him up and get his whole story. It's quite amazing, actually. And he ended up in a Frisbee accident, playing ultimate Frisbee, and broke something. So he sat down and just started reading his Bible again. And he said he's read the Bible so many times, but he always gets hung up in certain parts where he was like, it just doesn't make any sense. So while he was broken, while his body was broken and repairing, he started looking up words, which is what I've been doing for a while now, which is what brought me to him, is looking up the words in the original language and asking the questions like, where does this make sense? And how does it actually interplay? So that's what he started doing. So we're going to start in Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created. Then he has this huge question mark. He's pulling all of these verses, by the way, out of the New International Version. So that's what he's reading, looking at this. He says, when I read the verse in English, Christopher. He says, when I read the verse in English, there's no problem. With my linear Bible open, the Hebrew text on one side and the Greek of the Septuagint on the other side, I can't escape a rather big question. Why is the word Elohim, which is translated as God, shaped like a plural noun? So the original word, he's got two Bibles open side by side. He's looking at the one, the NIV, and then looking at this other one. And when the word God is used in the proper translation, it's Elohim. Elohim is a plural noun. How come if it's a plural noun, there's only one God? This is the question he's asking himself, okay? Genesis 1:26. And if you're looking through a Bible and you have never seen this before, it will just make you, like, I don't know, shake your head or go, what? And I have heard this before, and I've heard the reasons that they tell us why it's in there. Genesis 1:26, part of the verse says, let us make. Us. Let us make. And he says, wait a minute, who is us? This is the dawn of time before any intelligent creature had been named. So what or who are the others that God's talking to? Because what we were told was that God was floating around in space all by himself and probably got lonely and decided to make man in his own image. Like it says here, let us make. So who's the us? Who was with God when this was going on? What I was told the us was God the Spirit of Yeshua and then the Holy Spirit is what they try to tell you. But there's other places in the New Testament that lead you to believe that is directly not true. Yeshua's words himself, that is not. It would lead you to believe that's not the case. We'll get into that later. If we go further down, again in Genesis 1:26, let us make human beings look like us in the image and likeness of ourselves. Now the footnotes, where'd it go? In that New Jerusalem Bible, right? So that's this one, the New Jerusalem, which has all the words Elohim and Yahweh in it. There's footnotes in there on that passage, Genesis 1:26, that say, image is a concrete term implying a physical resemblance. Image is a concrete term implying a physical resemblance, like that between Adam and his son, right? So the Elohim are plural, creative, and physical. These were physical beings. The Elohim were physical beings. And then he asked the question, what's that about? Because we were taught God's a spirit. God is omnipresent, like list all the omni words, right? Forever, ongoing, not physical, right? You never got, except for in the pictures with the old white man in the beard and the robe, you never got the idea that God was a physical being until you saw a picture. But that doesn't even, that's confusion, right? It's part of what they do in our brains, is causes confusion between reality, what you're actually reading, and it just like dilutes everything, right? It confuses and contorts everything. Okay. Anybody have any comments or anything they want to say or talk about so far?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
So they confuse Elohim, which is a plural, with like a singular, the Most High God, right? So
yeah, and let me rephrase what you just said. They don't confuse it; they confuse us with it.
Oh,
They
was
knew
it
what they.
intentional?
Yes. Yes.
That's right. They do. They confuse us with it.
Yes.
And is she done?
Yeah, I'm done.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, thank you. So I studied this many years ago, many years ago, and was my reason for leaving the church, per se. And I learned that the ancient Hebrews were polytheists. They were not monotheists. So a lot of things have been perverted in translations on the way down, not just in the New Testament, or not just from a Christian perspective, but also in the Hebrew and Jewish culture as well.
Yep. Yep. And for a purpose. This plays right into the pandemic. For a purpose. Yes. There's a reason for all of this. So let me continue. So in Genesis 2:10 through 14, this is what it reads in the NIV. A river watering a garden flowed from Eden. So Eden was the garden that God supposedly made humans in, Adam and Eve. From there, it separated into 4 waterheads. The first of these was Pishon. It winds through the entire land of Havilah, where there is gold. The gold of that land is good. Aromatic resin and onyx are also there. The name of the second river is Gihon. The winds, it winds through the entire land of Cush. The name of the third river is the Tigris, and it runs through the east of Ashur. And the fourth river is the Euphrates. And so now his speculation on this is, again, Paul Wallace talking. If somewhere in Eden the humans have been provided with a garden to meet all of their needs, why is the Bible telling me the geographical location of key mineral deposits? And remember, this is a preacher. This is a very high up in the church preacher talking about this, going, why on earth are they giving me these geographical locations? Havilah for gold, resin, and onyx, and the gold is high grade. Who needs this, and how is it relevant? Why is that even in there, right? If it's just about humans being made and it's supposed to be this for the human moment, right? And now all of a sudden we have this geographical pinpointing of different places where these key mineral deposits are. It goes on in Genesis 2:17, but you must not eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat of it, you will certainly die. This is where it starts to get interesting. And if you're only reading the one text, you'll just sit there and be like, why would a God who just made us and loves us so much decide that if we eat from one tree, we'll surely die? Like, where does this even come from? So how the knowledge of good and evil is a bad thing for humans to have is an interesting study. If God wanted humans to be capable of free choice and love, then surely this kind of moral awareness is absolutely essential. Like, you need to have knowledge of good and evil if you're going to have a moral compass, right? It's almost impossible to get by without it. So it's basically kind of like we were given free will, supposedly given free will and choice, but only within certain parameters. You can only use your free will and your choice in certain parameters. He goes on to say, if humans are incapable of distinguishing good from bad, then how can they choose the good or be held culpable if they choose the bad? It makes no sense, right? This particular area where this tree of good and evil comes in absolutely makes no sense. He goes on to say, surely if man and woman have no moral awareness, then God has set them up to fail. They only can fail, right? It's really all you can do at that point is fail. If they fail, how can he hold them responsible? How does it make sense? On top of that, how can death be a just punishment from a loving God? It doesn't fit the crime. Something's wrong with this picture. We go on into Genesis 2:21. He says, so the man gave names to all the livestock, the birds in the sky, and all the wild animals. But for Adam, I find this one hysterical, no suitable helper was found. So the Lord God caused man to fall into a deep sleep, and while he was sleeping, he took one of man's ribs and then closed up the place with flesh. And so Paul's thoughts on this, isn't this a little short-sighted? If the Almighty God is the source of all wisdom, how can a female of the species be an afterthought? That's a funny question. How can woman be given as men's helper only after a line of pets have been proven inadequate? So he has all the animals. He's naming all of his animals, figures out that that's not adequate. I think somewhere in all of the scripture it says that man was kind of sad and lonely. And so God was like, oh, maybe you need a female, right? This is also, and he doesn't really go into this here that I have seen, right? So he took a rib. This is a genetic modification. He's genetically, or what do they call it when they take the genes of one and they create another, right? He's cloning. They're cloning the woman out of the man with genetic modifications, right? And you can see it pretty clearly once you see it. And then closed up the place, it actually says in the NIV, and then closed up the place with flesh. Why was that necessary to put in there? What else would you close it up with? It's an interesting question. Now in Genesis 3:1, it gets even more interesting, and this is where you really have to open your ability to kind of see and just be open and curious. Be open and curious. So now the snake enters the picture. So Paul says, okay, who is this? Clearly, he's not a snake. When he turns up, he's intelligent. He's not the snake that we would think of as a snake, a slithering serpent snake. All right, so our interpretation and understanding of some of these words are what block us from understanding what it really means. So it says snake, right? It's interpreted. What was the origin language? What did it really say? Some of the original texts say dragon. Some of the original texts, I mean, there's other words that are used, but snake is definitely not one of them. And our perception of what a snake is takes you down a totally, and even the pictures, right? They draw a tree with a snake winding up in its head, right? Pointing out one side. So he says he's not a snake when he turns up. He's intelligent. He has arms and legs and can speak human. He's a significant player, but he arrives on the scene without any kind of introduction or explanation. So what is he? He is not the Almighty, and he's not human. Has any other kind of being been named so far? And he's asking himself, did I miss something? Did I skip a verse that explains this other kind of being that's clearly inhabiting the planet? I wouldn't be the first person to miss the gnarlingly obvious. Come to think about it, almost every time Jesus quotes the Hebrew scriptures, he says, friends, look again. I think you may have missed something. Right? So there's always this looking again. And for our age, the looking again is to go back and recount original scripture, original stories, to include stories we were told not to include, right, outside of the circumference of the Bible itself, to include narratives from other lands and peoples and places, because it gives you clues and indications as to what our Bible actually talks about. He goes on to state, the fact is I did miss something, yet I was soon to find it hidden in plain sight in the very verses of the book of Genesis. So in Genesis 3:16, in plain, you will give birth to children, right? So the verse itself is longer than that, but the part he's quoted is, you will give birth to children. This is where he's telling Eve, in pain you will give birth to children. She has eaten of the apple, and now God's pissed off, and now he's going to make her give birth to children, right? So they're going to multiply, is what some of the translations say, and populate the planet. Is childbearing a punishment or a consequence? So Paul's asking this. No childbirth has occurred prior to this moment. In the flow of the story, painful childbirth is the only kind. And it comes after the humans gain consciousness, self-awareness, sexuality, and it all came about naturally. In Genesis 3:22, it says, and Yahweh Elohim said, see, the human has become like one of us. So now they're combining the Yahweh and the Elohim. And so now Paul's saying, wait a second, one of who? Who is God like? What we humans would be like them. How are we like them, right? We already know that they were physical, because even the New Jerusalem Bible states that there was a physical attribute to the Elohim, which is a plural. He says this is not literary trick. It's not a royal we or an author's we. There's really a plural here. There was more than one. Genesis 4:14 says, I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. So now if you fast forward, if you know Genesis at all, Adam and Eve had kids. There was Cain and Abel. They hated each other. They were from different cloths. There is speculation that they did not have the same father because they looked totally different. They acted totally different. One of them was kind of insane and mean and awful, right? And so in Genesis 4:14, it says, I will be a restless wanderer. And it's Cain that's out wandering. He leaves the clan. He leaves the place that they have settled outside of Eden. And whoever finds me will kill me. So Paul's saying, excuse me, right? If Cain and Abel, this is how we were taught, Cain and Abel are the only people on the planet giving birth to children, then who are these other people, these outsiders or these whoever's outside the garden who are going to kill Cain if they meet him? Who else is out there? They can't be the children of Adam and Eve because they had their children with them. So who are they? That's an interesting question. In Genesis 6:9, we're into the flood, right? So he's skipping around right through this pretty quickly. And the word God changes through all of this. We go from Elohim stories to Yahweh stories. And in the flood stories, it switches strictly to Yahweh, right? So now we're strictly with this Yahweh character in the Bible. in the history lesson that we're getting, who is angry about what humans are doing. And we've already had information. If you've read this text and you know it, it's only 6 or 7 chapters. I suggest you go read the whole thing, where there has been angels coming to the planet and mating with female women. So God's pissed off now that this is going on. But if it's all of his creation, I don't know, the questioning can get really real. Like, why is he even letting this go on and happen? So in Genesis 6:9, Noah's been given the information about the flood, about what's about to happen, and he's been given information about how to build a vessel to keep them afloat above the water, right, when it starts. And Noah took it seriously and actually started building this ark. And so the animals, is what we're told and what some of the texts read, went in 2 by 2. Apparently not. So he says, I can see that in Genesis 1 and 2 put 2 creation narratives side by side. Genesis 6 to 9 looks like it's taken 2 flood accounts and woven them together, right? So there's 2 different stories going on, and there's 2 different stories going on in the creation story. In one version, the animals enter in pairs, and another, they worked out a more complicated system. Just a reminder that Genesis has taken from Genesis is taken from a number of sources and is interwoven to create the familiar version that we were given, right? So the Genesis stories, and you will find Genesis stories all over this planet. Every population has one. Especially the people that are native, right, to cultures and to areas, have their own versions of these stories. The reason they have their own versions of these stories is because their ancestors lived through them, right? And they were handed down, and the versions that they have are what they have. We didn't live through any of this stuff. We were given a version in a book that we were told was called a Bible, and it was holy, and it was all you could read and all you could be in, right? And I apologize if I'm offending anybody. And Melissa's asking, let me get back to your question here in just a second. But I'm not apologizing, because if you don't know this background information, you can never figure out who is causing this pandemic, right? We go to the immediate, right? Some people think it's Joe Biden. Some people are aware that somebody's talking in Joe Biden's ear and think it's them. Somebody go beyond them and say it's the 13 families. And then you go beyond that, and you go beyond that. There's so many levels to this. And the only way to understand that is to understand this, okay? So Melissa is asking, Yahweh is singular. Yahweh is a name of one of the Elohim. Yahweh is a name of one of the Elohim. He is one of the council, which I'll get into in just a second, which is actually also in the Bible. The council is biblical. All right, so we're still in the flood. And he was saying, it's just a reminder, Genesis is taken from a number of sources. So remember that. This doesn't come from one source, right? We've got all kinds of different places that have these stories, and what the person who wrote the Bible, or the people who wrote the Bible, did underneath the person who commissioned it was to weave all these stories together and then tape the word God over everything, so you would think it was monotheistic when it's not. All right, so some of the texts tell stories of the Elohim. Others speak of Yahweh, the holy name of God, revealed to Moses at a later age, who also is thought to be, Moses is also thought to be Akhenaten. Right? The story goes on and on, right? And it's just super interesting when you really start looking at some of this stuff. And I don't even know where this book came from, but I just saw it on my shelf the other day, and I was like, oh, wait, what? And he actually starts his whole story out in Genesis 45, which we'll come back to. All right, so Yahweh is the name of the God that was revealed to Moses, who also could possibly be Akhenaten from Egypt. Scholars call the narrator of this whole story, of this whole Genesis story, J. I don't know what the J stands for. He never alliterates on that, but he's saying that's what they call it. So we're going to use J, right? Whenever I say J, that's who, he's the narrator of all of this stuff. So now this is Paul talking again. I remember reading up in college on 18th century Bible scholars like Jean Estruck, Karl Heinrich Graf, and Julius Walheimen, who have talked about the redactors, which is like scissor and pasting editors, who put Genesis into its current shape. Now, I have looked for information about some of these guys, and I can't find a lot, but they were the ones who were talking about how it's all cut and paste together. These academics might not have entirely nailed it, but it's easy to see how Jay inserted the holy name into Genesis. So the holy name, there's something to that holy name, to the Yahweh name, which is actually not the name because the Jews changed it because you weren't allowed to say it. So there's that part also. The name Yahweh is apparently a holy name. It is a name of God, but it was changed. And the God that's talking about it here is not the Yahweh God. It is an Elohim. So it'd be like Jesus is a good example of this. The name Jesus, the New Testament, and then you meet somebody from Mexico named Jesus, right? The name is just kind of a name. It was altered. The holy name itself is a whole nother story. Okay. So sometimes Jay replaces Elohim with Yahweh, as in Genesis 11, 6 through 7, and chapter 18, verses 21, and then also in 19:1. So he's going back and forth using this name. Other time, he adds the name Yahweh to Elohim in an Elohim story. So some of these stories are about the Elohim, and some of these stories are about Yahweh. Yahweh is one of the Elohim. So he's part of, but he tried to pull himself aside. It would be like if you had a family of like 19 brothers and sisters, and one of you decided to step up and be in charge of everybody else, right? You had to have a heavy hand and a loud mouth and a flash of lightning, right? And then you had to have times when you kept everybody in quiet and love and peaceful, right? And you had to have that dynamic going on. That would be a Yahweh, right? He stepped out of the Elohim and said, no, I want to do it this way. So in Paul's saying, I can certainly see why he would do that, switching the names back and forth. Jay is telling the reader to see the hand of Yahweh in the drama of the stories. So he's trying to point that out, apparently. How did I miss the implication of this? Because the very presence of the post-Moses name of Yahweh in Genesis tells me that we are not reading an original version. Jay isn't hiding what he's doing. When he adds the holy name, Jay shows the reader that he is taking an even older story, which was probably a known story or a written oral tradition, and in plain sight, he alters it. All right? Is anybody following me at this point? Are we just like swimming in this craziness? Yes. Okay.
Following.
Good. No, Melissa just now said, no wonder God has 72 names. And kind of, and you're fine, right? You can come back. I suggest you get the book and read it. Look this dude up, his YouTube site, his YouTube channel, and you have to kind of sift through it. Go to where he has everything like logged together in blocks of his videos, because there's a lot of other weird stuff in there, but it's called The Fifth Time, right? So you can find, and he'll go through these, and you can actually see his face and hear his voice, and it's very interesting. He even tells his own story, so it's very interesting. All right, where was I? All right, so we're in the drama of the story. So he's just asking the question now, what about the original version of these stories? What text was Jay working from? What are they? Where did they go? How do I get a copy, right? And if they weren't Yahweh stories, and if the Elohim in there was plural, these original versions of Genesis stories aren't God's stories at all. Not the way we were taught God is, omnipresent, omnipotent, right, all-powerful, all of the, right, never dies, not a physical form. If these things were a physical form, that means they have a lifespan. That means they probably die. That's an interesting thought. Is God dead? Right, the God mentioned in the book, right? Okay, so we're going to move on. In Genesis 6, verses 1 through 4, so we're kind of backing up pre-flood. So this is the start of the flood story in Genesis, but it's earlier than we were talking before. It says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days. And I know most of you have heard of the Nephilim. The next part of it says, and also afterwards. So the flood was designed to kill everything on the planet, is what we were taught, yeah? The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterwards. When the sons of God, hold on to that term, the sons of God, went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old men of renown. This gets crazy in here. This part gets crazy. So now he's like, wait a minute. If the flood destroyed all living creatures on the land, where did the Nephilim go? Nephilim were also called giants in other texts, so the translation is giants. And where did they go so they could reappear after the flood came back down? Right? So they only had two choices. They went either into the sky or they went into the earth. And there's some speculation that they are still in the earth, that some of them are still in the earth, in the interior of the earth. And there's also speculation that some of them left the planet. Genesis 6, 1 through 4 again, when human beings begin to increase in number on the planet and the daughters were born to them, the sons of God, in the origin text was called the Bene Elohim. So now who the hell are the Bene Elohim? They saw the daughters of human, these would be equated to the Nephilim. They saw the daughters of humans were beautiful and married any of them that they chose. So he asked this question, who are the Bene Elohim? Also translated as the sons of God. So the Bene Elohim are not the Elohim. They are the sons of Elohim, of this group of beings. And what is different about, what is different about them is that their relations with human females produced giants. So the giants were produced from these beings, these Bene Elohim, the Nephilim, having sex with human females, and the result was a giant, right? So all over the planet, including Ohio, which I've been seeing this more and more, there's these mounds of dirt, and they say that giants are buried under these mounds, even in our neck of the woods, right? This isn't just over there, it's all over the planet. He goes on to state, I have read somewhere that some commentators reckon the Bene Elohim is talking about local powers or kings or elites. If land barons were taking girls by force, that's certainly a problem. What does that sound like? Even we hear about it today, right? The human trafficking issues. But that explanation makes no sense of their noticing the quote-unquote daughters of men, as if human girls were some kind of novelty. Neither would their relations produce giants. And would that really be the cause for a catastrophic genociding flood? It doesn't quite hang together. Perhaps there's more to this prehistoric land barons than meets the eye. Maybe these prehistoric communities were being ruled over by something else. We're in the twilight zone here, just like we are right now. We are in the twilight zone. He says, I don't think these Bene Elohim were human. And obviously not. If the Elohim are human, the sons of Elohim are not going to be human, right? I know that some interpret Bene Elohim as angels. So that's what we were taught, right? When we saw that term Bene Elohim, and even in Kabbalistic, if you've ever studied the Kabbalah, I'm trying to say this right. There's two words that are very similar and they're two different things. Not the Kabbalah, right? Kabbalah, yeah, right? So they will say that the Bene Elohim are angels. But Paul's saying, doesn't Hebrews in the New Testament rule that out, where it says, and literally, right? I mean, this is craziness to me because the New Testament totally says no. For which of the angels did God ever say, you are my son? Today I have become your father, or again, I will be his father and he will be my son. No, right? So the Bene Elohim are not angels, which is what they try to lead us to believe. They are not angels. Paul says maybe the Bene Elohim, and he spells this in small letters. This is not capital. He's not capitalizing it like it's a title. It's a more figurative kind of expression. Could these entities be referred to as sons of Elohim in the same way we refer to the sons and daughters of the Mayflower or the sons and daughters of the Revolution? In other words, perhaps it's not literal. Perhaps it's an idiom. And we know that a lot of the Old Testament is written in Jewish idioms. And if you don't understand the idiom, you're not going to understand what you're reading. In that way, Bene Elohim could mean the godlike or the Elohim kind. Just as we have humans existing within humankind, maybe Elohim exists within Bene Elohim. Whatever the Bene Elohim are exactly, they are not God, and they are not human, and they are not angels. What they are has not been explained. We really don't know what they are, and we don't know where they came from. For some strange reason, Jay, right, so he was the narrator of putting all this stuff together, assumes that we know all about them. So that means they're written about somewhere else. And in the time that this was written, my guess is they did know about them. They knew what the Bene Elohim were because they walked with them. Of course they knew what they were. And so he's asking the question now, what other sources does Jay have and had been reading that he thinks we've been reading, right? So there's sources, there's information somewhere that we should have to make sense of this that was left out, right? Totally just left out. So in Genesis, we're going to move forward. In Genesis 20:13, the Elohim caused me to wander from my father's house. This is what it says. The Elohim caused me to wander from my father's house. And now Paul is saying, if Elohim is supposed to be a general name for God or a proper name for the one true God, Yahweh, then why does the word given plural attributes and verb forms? In this text, Abraham, so this was Abraham speaking, in this text, Abraham uses a plural Elohim with a plural verb. Now you have to understand something about the Abraham-Sarah stories and where they came from, because Abraham and Sarah are not who you think they are. They actually came from, and I forget the name of the city, but it was Sumerian. So they came from a distant land and came into this area, and what Paul kind of surmises through some of his information is that they probably brought their knowledge of the Elohim with them. They knew things that we, in this period of time, obviously don't know about because they had direct relationship and direct interaction with these beings. Paul goes on to say, I have read commentators who say that Abraham wants to sound like a polytheist because he's talking to a polytheist. Really? This makes me crazy. It gets so convoluted. Paul says really in question marks it, and then he says the editor doesn't iron that out, so we don't get the information we need to fully understand this. The plural issues go all the way through Genesis. Go all the way through Genesis. If you start reading Genesis in a plural form, instead of like it's a singular, like it's a monotheistic subject, it's a one God thing, and you read it in its plural form, it will change the nature of the whole book, and it will make you want to go look for other information. And the other information that was left out, he goes on through here at some point, and literally starts going into the Sumerian texts, the Sumerian tablets, the cuneiform tablets, which we had no translation for early on because they just thought they were weird little symbols and had no way to translate it. But something happened that gave us a translation. And it was a wall that was found, I think, over the sea. It literally is on the side of the sea, carved into stone. And it's a Sumerian, I think it's 3 different languages it's carved in. And I want to say one is Aramaic and then one was something else. But because it was in these 3 different languages, they were able to finally figure out the Sumerian text, translate all of those. And it's that text that Sarah and Abraham were probably going by, because that was the text of their land. That was the understanding of their land. And it's what they were living in. They were living with the Elohim. They were living under or around the Bene Elohim. They saw these things happen, right? Sarah was too old to have have a child and God gave her a child. How did this happen? What alterations did he have to do in order to fix her body so it would bear children again? Right? I guarantee you it wasn't what we presume from reading the story and reading that text. This goes on. Let me do a few more of these. This goes on to say in Genesis 35:7, it says, and there Jacob built an altar and called the place Bethel, because there Elohim, and in the text you're going to probably, if you read your regular text, it'll just say God. Because there Elohim appeared, plural verb, to him when he was fleeing his brother. So Jacob was in the process of fleeing, and you have to know that whole story. But they're using Elohim, which is a plural noun, with a plural verb. All right, so there's more than one thing going on here. In Genesis 11:7, so we're backing the truck up a little bit, Yahweh says, come let us go down and let us confuse, plural verb, their language there, right? We're talking about the Tower of Babel. And that's a whole interesting story because they confused whatever language they were using at this period of time, which there was probably a few of them. But we're talking I don't even know how to say this right. We're talking pre-functional, what we think it is, what we were taught, right? When you think Bible, you think the thing was written in a certain period of time and but the information in the Bible was taken from texts that are older than the text that we understand the Bible was taken from, right? So the whole languaging scenario was different. And I'll give you, I'll have to put it in. I'm not following here. What's here? Nephilim are also plural. Yeah, sorry, I wasn't watching your messages over here. So wait, giants equal Nephilim. The giants were probably superheroes to that era. The giants were, and which one was this in? Because the way it reads like a superhero novel. They were heroes of old. This is Genesis 1 through 4. They were heroes of old and men of renown. Reads like a superhero novel. Like they obviously had powers that humans did not have. What is the Norse mythology refers to as giant goes? And is it mythology? That would be my question. All right, yeah, so this guy's name is Paul Wallace with the W-A-L-L-I-S. This other one, this Moses, and he has a ton of books out, the same kind of thing. He is Ahmed Osman. Can you see that? Okay. Let me scroll down a little bit more here. Okay, you guys are taking care of each other in the chat box. God bless you. All right. All right, so Jacob fleed his brother. Now we're back in 11. Come let us go down and use their language. So plural, 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 plural. There's more than one. There's more than one thing going on. They're speaking in plural form. They're talking about what we think is a God as many gods. So this is an interesting one. If you've ever heard about Abraham's sacrifice of his son, and his son's name was Isaac, and it just doesn't make sense, right? It's just the weirdest thing. So we're talking about child sacrifice, first of all. This is Genesis 22. Let me read this to you. Abraham's near sacrifice of his son never made sense to me. This is Paul talking. Why would a loving God, a God who had promised Abraham a family line through his son, Isaac, then asked to mimic the absolute worst of pagan religions and sacrifice his firstborn son? A plural, non-divine Elohim would make a lot more sense than Jay's edit of this episode. In the passage, Elohim and Yahweh actually play on opposite teams, right? So we read it God, 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 but it's actually Elohim and Yahweh, and they're on opposite sides of the fence. It begins when Elohim tells Abraham to sacrifice his firstborn and only son. So here's the verse itself. It happened sometime later that Elohim put Abraham to the test. So they're telling you it's some kind of test. Elohim said, take your son, your only son, and offer him as a burnt offering. Abraham stretched out his hand and took a knife to kill his son. And then Paul's saying, this isn't how other gods proved they had exact, total, unquestioning obedience from their human subjects. The Greek island, Phoenicia, near the east, Mesoamerica, were all areas where child sacrifice was expected by the local Elohim. What must these Elohim have been to produce such inhuman behavior among their human subjects? When Elohim demanded it of Abraham, the stakes are high. Isaac is the son from whom the people of Israel are supposed to descend, hence Yahweh acts to prevent the killing, right? So now we've got Elohim telling him, and then the scriptures, you'll read the two different names. Elohim is telling him to kill, and then Yahweh steps in and says, actually sends a messenger from out of heaven. A messenger of Yahweh shouts and calls out to Abraham, saying, Abraham, Abraham, do not raise your hand against this boy. And now Paul's saying, if it was already well known, the story would pose a problem. There's too many gods in it for us to be monotheistic. There's too many for us to have just one God. It turns into a monotheistic text because Jay translated Elohim to mean the same as Yahweh. He equates them by inserting the last word of the story in this sentence. And Yahweh says, now I know that let me say that again. Now I know that you fear Elohim and did not withhold your son from me. Meaning he would have sacrificed his son. He would have given that all up, right? So it was like proving his loyalty by, right, doing a sacrifice. And we see this all throughout even our history right now, right? The Satanists sacrifice all the time, and they're called to sacrifice. There is actually a theory, and I actually had some insight on this myself, that Lucifer, so one of the fallen angels, has called for a sacrifice, right? Also equated to Satan. And it was in order for the powers who run us to prove their allegiance, to prove their alliance, because there must have been some rumblings in the ranks, right? The sacrifice is always huge, right? For Abraham to sacrifice his son when it's supposed to produce this line that is supposed to build this community, that's a huge sacrifice. John Travolta was called to sacrifice years ago, and he was given the choice between his wife or his son. He chose his son, right? That's how the story goes. Sacrifice. And over and over and over, you'll hear these stories in the elites or in the Hollywood elites, right? Which is a different level of elite. But the sacrifice is huge. And right now, the sacrifice is humanity. It's us, right? We are the sacrifice. So it's just interesting. So the addendum that Jay turns into a monotheistic text by equating Yahweh with Elohim, who gave the order to sacrifice. He changes the story from one of graciousness, divine rescue, to a cruel divine test, right? It's Elohim against Yahweh. It wasn't one God testing a man and saying, oh, you passed the test, you were going to do it, you're fine. It was probably more than one Elohim fighting against Yahweh. They were probably in a battle for this. All right, where are we at? Any questions or thoughts? Who's the author of Escape from Eden? That one is Paul. Yeah. And it's Wallace, Wallis. So you find it easier. Wallis. Okay. And I mean, crazy things, right? I keep getting stuff pointed out. So we're in this Moses story, and in Genesis 45:8, it talks about the brothers paid visits to Egypt. So these two brothers, it was Joseph and who else? I'm in a different book over here. But they were told to pay visits to Egypt. And this is like Joseph, the story of the coat of many colors, and his brothers stripped him of his coat. And some people that think that many-colored coat was his spirit that they stripped him of, right? So think about chakras and how the electromagnetic system of the human body works. If those lights go out, you're effectively dead, right? Melissa's putting things together over here. And he was told that he would be father to Pharaoh, right, in the land of Egypt. Now think about this for a second. Everybody seems to skip over this verse, and I actually looked it up in one of these translations. It's Genesis 45:8. And this is where Joseph is revealing himself. He's actually working for the Pharaoh. And it says, in 7, it says, God sent me before you to preserve you for a heritage in the earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. And verse 8 says, so now it was not by you who sent me here, but God. So, and I'm asking which God, right? So now you have to start asking, when you see the word God, what God? An Elohim or Yahweh or, right? There were so many beings on the planet at this point. He has made me a father to Pharaoh and lord over his entire house and ruler throughout all of the land of Egypt. So in the line of kings, in the lineage of kings, it's thought that these people are the same people, that Moses was Pharaoh and that Joseph was actually a king. His name was, it was the father of Pharaoh. I think it was Yara. You just have to start asking so many questions at this point. Like, what were we taught? How does this really work? The Yahweh stories and the Elohim stories are separate stories. If you can get a copy of the Sumerian cuneiform text, and you can actually find it on YouTube. Some people have put it into, videos where you can listen to it or watch it or whatever. I like hard copies because it gives you more information. You can sit there and really scrutinize through it. I don't even know. What are you thinking? What do you think at this point? Melissa asked a question, these Elohim may be the Anunnaki. I actually think the people who sit on top, our original discussion went back to Vanguard and BlackRock. And the people we can't know who are, I think they are Elohim. I think they are Anunnaki. The beings that run the high level of this that we can't know who are, I believe that's who they are. Right? Some of the Anunnaki were nice. Some of the Anunnaki or the Elohim were nice. Some of them were not so nice. They didn't care about humans. They were here to strip mine the gold and some of the products from this earth. That is what they were doing. That's why there was a map of some of the precious metals in early Genesis. Right? It was a map where they could find these things. There is speculation that some of the giants, some of the production from these, right, the Nephilim, are living in the center of the earth, right? They had to go one way or the other at the flood, right? I think I mentioned this before. They are mentioned in Genesis, the Nephilim, and they said they were here before and then after, meaning before the flood and after the flood. Well, if the flood killed everything, how could they be here after? Which means they either had to go up, they had to go into the sky, or they had to go into the earth and somehow seal entrances so it wouldn't fill up with water. Right? So the narrative that we're told definitely conflates and confuses the whole system. So I do think that these beings are still here. I do think that they are about to showing up in more of a physical form. I think they can translate themselves from physical to non-physical, right? I think they have that capability. And whether it's a spiritual woo-woo kind of thing or whether they have technology that does it for them is another question. The other thought about all this, and this is where Paul goes, and we'll go into this more next week, is that these fallen angels or the sons of God were actually what we would consider to be ETs. So they have technology. They are advanced races. They can move in and out of the different dimensions that we're starting to barely understand. We're like at the bottom of the totem pole on all this stuff, right? Moving up through through the ranks, which is why, the people who talk about ascension, you're trying to ascend yourself into a different plane of being. You'll probably find these beings there, right? Once you move your own awareness or your own spiritual nature into that place. And so that's kind of where I'm taking all of this at this point. And that's what you're going to read in here. So Susan is saying many indigenous tribes have stories of these people taking them into the earth during the Ice Age. There's that, and also taking them into the sky. It's not one direction, it's both, right? They're inhabiting both places for sure. Every dignitary known to travel. Everyone that's been allowed to. I don't think Kennedy was allowed to. He was killed because he was trying to tell us. Melissa's asking, so the Nephilim were the offspring of the Bene Elohim and the daughters of men. Nephilim. I think the Nephilim were here already. So this is where it gets really kind of twisted. And hey, if you're interested in this kind of subject matter and you want more, you want to be able to participate in a class like this, join us on Sunday mornings from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. It's a drop-in format. You can come and go as you want to. And we talk about these kind of things. We'll discuss things from different books and different scriptures, different areas of ancient texts that sometimes we don't ever get to talk about, or you may not even know about. So come in with an open mind, come in open and curious. And if you have questions, I never mind answering those. We also will do heart coherence work. We'll get in the heart, get you a little bit revved up so you can get closer to your spirit and find that part of you. It's an interesting walk when you're walking as your spirit instead of walking as this human shell that we've been trapped in. I want to bless you and thank you for being here. And this class is free. That's the number one question I get is, what does it cost? We meet every Sunday and it's free. I do have a button for donations if you'd like to donate, but it's definitely not necessary. If you don't have it or don't want to, please just show up. The more we work together, the more we congregate together, the stronger we get. I want to bless you. Again, thank you for being here. And my name is Christy Mattoon, and this is Mind Rewire.